Medieval cathedrals hold secrets in plain sight. Those intricate stone carvings are far more than simple decoration. They form a coded language, a sophisticated system used by builders to pass on knowledge forbidden by the powerful institutions of their day. This video will give you the key to see these ancient structures not just as places of worship, but as vast, encrypted libraries. You will discover how master artisans risked everything to embed heretical ideas, advanced mathematics, and esoteric wisdom directly into the stone. We will explore why a simple foliage pattern could conceal a dangerous philosophical concept, and how the precise number of arches might reveal a truth that challenged the very foundations of medieval society. By the end, you will never look at a Gothic cathedral the same way again. What forgotten message might be waiting for you on the next stone wall you see? To understand this coded language, you must first feel the immense pressure these builders worked under. Knowledge was not just power, it was a tightly controlled commodity. The church and the crown held a monopoly on truth, and any deviation from approved doctrine could mean ruin. Guilds of stonemasons and architects, while skilled, existed under the watchful eyes of powerful patrons. An idea that challenged religious dogma or questioned royal authority was not merely controversial, it was a direct threat to the established order. There is a story told about the construction of Chartres Cathedral, where a master carver was severely punished for subtly incorporating a pagan symbol into his work. This incident sent a chilling message to artisans across Europe. It forced their hands. They could not openly express the deeper truths they discovered through their work, the advanced geometry, the philosophical insights, or the precise astronomical alignments they understood. As historian Dr. Elena Vance explains, the suppression of alternative knowledge systems created a culture of clandestine communication among artisans. Their very survival depended on it. So how do you preserve something precious when you are forbidden from writing it down? You learn to speak in a silent tongue. You weave your forbidden knowledge into the visual noise of decoration, hiding profound secrets within what appears to be simple foliage, a common beast, or a saint's familiar face. This was not a game, it was a necessity for the preservation of ideas. The system they developed had to be robust, a language that could be read by a fellow initiate but would look like mere artistry to a suspicious bishop or a royal inspector. The genius of their solution was rooted in the most fundamental aspect of their profession, the very principles of sacred geometry and proportion that gave these cathedrals their breathtaking form. The guilds were the keepers of flame in a world of intellectual darkness. Within their lodges, a master mason would gather his apprentices not merely to teach them how to strike a chisel, but to impart a deeper wisdom. Picture a young man, his hands still raw from the day's labor, leaning close as his master traces shapes in the dust by flickering candlelight. He learns that a circle is not just a circle, it is a symbol of unity and perfection. A triangle is not merely a stable shape, but a representation of a divine trinity or the three stages of human existence. This was knowledge passed from mouth to ear, a fragile chain of custody that could be broken by a single plague or a tragic accident on the scaffolding. The spoken word was their primary library, but stone became their permanent archive. Faced with the fragility of memory, these artisans made a profound decision. They began to translate their most vital secrets into a silent, enduring language carved directly into the cathedrals they built. The very stones became their textbooks. A perfectly proportioned arch was not just a feat of engineering. It was a lesson in harmonic ratios, a physical manifestation of mathematical truth that any initiated Mason could measure and understand for centuries to come. Even complex philosophical ideas, like the Neoplatonic belief in a universe emanating from a single divine source, could be encoded in the radiating patterns of a rose window or the hierarchical arrangement of figures on a facade. This was their failsafe, a distributed backup system etched across all of Europe. The guilds now faced their greatest creative challenge: how to hide their most precious knowledge in the most visible places imaginable. Their encoding methods would become a masterpiece of clandestine communication. Their stone menagerie was a living library of forbidden ideas. A griffin with its lion's body and eagle's head was more than a mythical beast, it was a carefully chosen emblem of duality. For an initiated Mason, it represented the perfect union of earthly strength and celestial vision, a philosophical ideal that challenged rigid hierarchies. Nearby, a basilisk might coil around a column, its stone gaze warning not of a literal monster, but of the peril that came from accepting doctrine without question. It was a symbol for the dangers of untested knowledge, a subtle reminder to fellow artisans to seek verification through their own hands and minds. But perhaps the most widespread and mysterious of these symbols is the Green Man. His face, woven from leaves and vines, peers out from hundreds of cathedrals. To the average worshipper, he was a simple, rustic motif. But for those who understood the code, he was a profound statement on the life force inherent in all nature, a concept of immanent divinity that often stood in direct opposition to the Church's transcendent God. He was a silent testament to a much older, earth-based wisdom preserved in plain sight. At the Abbey of Saint Pierre in Moissac, a labyrinthine dragon is carved with astonishing complexity. To the uninitiated, it is a depiction of the biblical serpent, yet some researchers argue its twisting form, the specific number of its coils, and its position relative to other carvings create a precise diagram. This dragon does not just represent evil, it encodes an entire alchemical process of transformation, from base matter to enlightened spirit, a formula that would have been dangerously heretical to write down. Each of these creatures acted as a sophisticated mnemonic device. A single glance at a griffin could trigger an entire lecture on the balance of opposites heard years before in the Mason's Lodge. The system was brilliantly layered, offering a safe, public interpretation for the masses and a deeply hidden, technical one for the cognoscenti. Yet this symbolic bestiary was only the first, most visual layer of their code. To convey even more precise and dangerous knowledge, the builders turned to a more universal and unforgiving language, the silent mathematics of sacred geometry. A compass pressed into soft plaster was not merely a tool for drawing circles. In the hands of a master builder, it became a key for inscribing the universe itself into stone. This second layer of their coded language relied on sacred geometry, a system where every line, every angle, and every proportion held a deeper, often forbidden meaning. The layout of a floor labyrinth was not just a path for penitents to walk on their knees. Its winding, measured course could map the soul's journey toward enlightenment, its precise dimensions encoding a spiritual formula. A rose window's breathtaking symmetry was more than beauty. It was a complex diagram of cosmic order, with each petal and tracery bar representing celestial spheres and divine harmonies. Picture a master on the tracing floor, inscribing a perfect pentagram within a circle. To an uneducated observer, this was a preliminary sketch, but for the initiated, this single act was a profound statement. It represented the Hermetic principle of as above, so below, the idea that the microcosm of humanity reflects the macrocosm of the divine universe. This was a dangerously empowering concept, suggesting every individual contained a spark of the celestial, a notion that challenged the Church's role as the sole intermediary with God. They were building heresy into the very ribs of the vaults. The most famous of these geometric keys is the golden ratio. We know it as a specific mathematical relationship, roughly 1.618 to 1, where a line is divided so the whole is to the larger part as the larger part is to the smaller. Medieval builders did not have our decimal notation, but they understood this ratio intimately through simple compass and rule construction. They saw it echoed in the spiral of a nautilus shell and the branching of trees. For them, it was not just a number for creating pleasing proportions in a window arch or a door frame. It was proof of a divine harmonic language underlying all of creation. Using it was a way to align their human-made structures with the fundamental order of nature itself, a form of knowledge that blurred the line between science and mysticism. Nowhere is this geometric cipher more densely packed than at Roslin Chapel in Scotland. Its surfaces are a riot of carved cubes, arches, and intricate patterns that seem purely decorative. Yet scholars have found that these elements are arranged in precise geometric sequences. Certain clusters of cubes are believed to represent musical chords, the Chladni patterns of sound waves made solid in stone. The angles between pillars and the curves of arches form relationships that correspond to celestial alignments and long-lost mathematical constants. Roslin stands as a frozen symphony, its every stone a note in a grand composition of hidden knowledge. This mathematical language was universal and precise, yet it remained silent to anyone without the key. It was a perfect cipher, but geometry alone was not the only numerical code these master builders employed. Beyond the carvings and the compass lines lay a third, even more subtle layer of the code, written in the silent language of numbers. Medieval builders saw numbers not as abstract quantities, but as vessels of profound spiritual meaning. A staircase was not just a set of steps, it was a measured ascent. The pillars in a crypt were not merely supports, they were a counted choir. They employed systems like Gematria, where letters of the alphabet hold specific numerical values, allowing words and names to be converted into sums that could be mirrored in architectural counts. This meant that the number of times a specific floral motif was repeated, or the precise count of arches in a cloister, could hide a name, a date, or a philosophical principle. The west facade of Notre Dame de Paris presents a legendary example. To the casual observer, its array of statues and arches is a magnificent but chaotic display of faith. Yet some researchers argue this is an illusion of order designed to conceal a deeper one. They suggest the number and arrangement of these elements form a complex numerological code, one deeply influenced by the Kabbalah, a Jewish mystical tradition that would have been considered dangerously forbidden knowledge in the heart of medieval Christendom. Within this system, the number 7 might signify spiritual perfection and completion, echoing the 7 days of creation. The number 13, far from being unlucky, could represent a rebellious cycle of renewal or a hidden lunar calendar. An initiate trained in this numerical lexicon could stand before the facade and, by simply counting, extract a message about cosmic harmony or divine names that was completely invisible to the bishop who commissioned the work. This numerical layer intertwined perfectly with the visual and geometric codes, creating a multi-faceted cipher of immense sophistication. But a code is useless without a key, and a key must be shared. How did a master builder in France ensure his counterpart in Germany could read the same numerical message carved into a distant cathedral? This crucial task fell to the master builders themselves and their secretive journeys across a continent. These master builders were the intellectual rock stars of their era, their reputations forged in stone and spanning continents. A single individual carried within his mind a vast and evolving lexicon of symbols, a living key to the silent language. When he arrived at a new cathedral site, his leather satchel held more than just tools. It contained his personal set of templates and carefully guarded pattern books. To the local bishop, these were simple architectural plans, but within their pages lay the true treasure, the detailed ciphers for the local symbolic code. A griffin carved in an English cathedral, for instance, could be trusted to convey the same message about balancing earthly and celestial power as its counterpart in a French chapel, because the same master or one from the same network had overseen its creation. This system of itinerant experts created a remarkable cross-pollination of forbidden ideas. A philosophical concept deemed too dangerous to speak aloud in the intellectual circles of Paris could be safely translated into geometry and symbol, then carried by a master builder to a remote worksite in Germany. There, it would be embedded into the very fabric of a new church, hidden in plain sight from the local authorities who would never recognize the heresy smiling down at them from a capital. This was the medieval equivalent of a secure, decentralized information network, with these traveling masters as its routers and amplifiers. They were the human glue that bound this vast, stone-based library together, ensuring its messages remained consistent and decipherable across generations and borders. The cathedrals they left behind form a permanent, distributed database of esoteric knowledge, a backup drive made of granite and stained glass. To truly grasp the ambition of this project, we must ask what specific, dangerous truths they were so desperate to preserve. These builders risked everything to embed heretical ideas directly into the stone. Among the most dangerous secrets they preserved were alternative visions of the divine itself. Throughout the great cathedral, you can find subtle carvings that quietly challenge the core tenets of medieval Catholic authority. Consider the enigmatic Black Madonna statues. To the faithful, these dark-hued figures of the Virgin Mary were objects of veneration. Yet their distinctive coloration and often imposing presence have led many scholars to see them as something more, as deliberate echoes of pre-Christian earth goddesses like Isis or Cybele. They represent a powerful, primal aspect of the divine feminine, a concept that the patriarchal church structure often suppressed. By giving these figures a place of honor, the builders preserved a much older spiritual current, weaving it seamlessly into the fabric of Christian worship. This was not a rejection of faith, but an expansion of it, hidden in plain sight. Another profound challenge was encoded through symbols linked to Gnostic traditions. Gnosticism taught that salvation came not through church sacraments, but through personal, direct knowledge of the divine, a concept called gnosis. This idea was explosively dangerous, as it made the vast church hierarchy potentially unnecessary. How do you carve such a rebellious idea into a church wall? You do not write a treatise. Instead, you might craft a specific scene where a saint receives a book of wisdom directly from a heavenly hand, bypassing any earthly intermediary. This visual metaphor celebrated the individual's quest for understanding, a quiet rebellion against the monopoly on truth. Then there are the most startling and defiant figures of all, the Sheila na gigs. These are explicit carvings of women boldly displaying their genitals, often found perched high on church walls and towers across Britain and Ireland. To the untrained eye, they are simply bizarre, even crude, grotesques, but their placement is no accident. Many researchers believe they are surviving representations of a powerful, pre-Christian creator goddess, a symbol of raw, life-giving power and sovereignty over death. To install such a figure on a church was an act of incredible audacity. It was a permanent, unblinking statement that the old ways, the earth-centered beliefs, had not been erased but were instead anchored into the very stones of the new religion. This was the preservation of dissent in its most physical form, a silent stone protest against a total religious monopoly. Alongside this theological rebellion, the builders also found ways to encode a very different kind of forbidden knowledge, one rooted not in faith, but in the precise observation of the natural world. The heavens themselves were mapped in secret across these stone ceilings. Beyond challenging religious doctrine, these master builders preserved a scientific understanding of the cosmos that was centuries ahead of its time. Long before Copernicus or Galileo, some artisans held a dangerous comprehension of a heliocentric solar system and complex astronomical cycles. They could not publish their findings, so they built them instead, encoding celestial truths into the very alignment and ornamentation of their cathedrals. A perfect beam of sunlight striking a specific carving on a specific day became their silent declaration of a cosmic truth. Consider the ancient precedent of Newgrange in Ireland. Though built millennia before the medieval period, its principle was a powerful inspiration. There, a narrow roof box channels the rising sun's light deep into the inner chamber only on the winter solstice, dramatically marking the year's rebirth. Medieval masons understood and adapted this profound concept. They created their own light-based calendars where a shaft of sunlight would illuminate a particular capital, a specific face in a fresco, or a marked stone on the floor only on an equinox or a significant saint's day. This was not just pretty, it was precise observational astronomy carved into the fabric of a building. Look up at the facades of many great cathedrals, and you will find a carved menagerie of zodiac signs and planetary symbols. To the church, these were often dismissed as rustic remnants or simple decorative motifs representing God's creation, but for the initiated, they were far more. The specific arrangement of these symbols could represent a sophisticated cosmological model, a map of the heavens that quietly contradicted the Earth-centered universe officially endorsed by theology. Placing the sun symbol in a position of clear geometric prominence, for instance, could be a subtle nod to a heliocentric reality. This knowledge was explosively dangerous. The Church's entire theological edifice was built upon the idea of a universe created for humanity, with a stationary Earth at its literal and figurative center. To suggest otherwise was not just a scientific disagreement, it was heresy that unraveled the core of medieval belief. By hiding these cosmic diagrams in plain sight, the builders ensured this revolutionary knowledge would survive, waiting in the stones for a future generation with eyes to see it. This scientific daring, this need to preserve truths about the world and the heavens, was matched only by their fierce protection of the practical secrets that made such wonders possible. The very survival of their craft depended on guarding its most valuable secrets. These guilds of masons and architects were, in essence, the first research and development corporations, and their advanced mathematical and engineering principles were proprietary assets. A revolutionary formula for a mortar that could set underwater, or a geometric sequence for calculating the precise thrust of a flying buttress, was not information to be shared freely. It was the source of their reputation, their contracts, and their livelihood. This practical, technical knowledge was as forbidden in its own way as any heretical idea, because revealing it would mean economic suicide. So they did what they had always done, they encrypted it. The complex geometry of a vault's ribs, those beautiful stone arches spreading across a ceiling, was far more than an aesthetic choice. To an initiated mason, the intersecting angles and curves were a direct diagram of the load-bearing calculations used to design it. Each line was a silent instruction, a permanent record of how to distribute the immense weight of the roof safely down to the ground. A master could look up at a finished vault and, by reading its form, understand the entire structural logic without a single written word. This was knowledge made solid, a three-dimensional textbook in stone. Other carvings held even more specific recipes, a specific, endlessly looping knotwork pattern, seemingly just an intricate decoration around a doorway, might actually encode a particular sequence for assembling the complex wooden scaffolding needed to reach that very height. The number of loops, the direction of the weaves, could correspond to the order of placing beams and supports. Another symbol, perhaps a stylized flower with a precise number of petals, might conceal the formula for a particularly durable lime plaster, with each petal representing a specific ingredient or mixing ratio. This was genius in its practicality. The carvings served a dual purpose, beautifying the cathedral while also acting as a permanent, on-site technical manual for future repairs and expansions, a manual that only guild members could read. They were protecting their trade, ensuring that only those who had been taught the cipher could access the knowledge required to build and maintain these monumental structures. This naturally leads to a crucial question. With hundreds of carvings covering every surface, how could an artisan distinguish a mere decorative flourish from a vital piece of encoded information? The answer lies not in the stone itself, but in the rigorous, secretive system of education that turned an apprentice into a master. A cathedral's stone tapestry was an open book, but only for those who knew how to read its pages. The truth is, most hands that shaped these stones understood only the literal surface of their work. An apprentice might spend years learning to carve a perfect acanthus leaf, yet never grasp that its specific curvature and number of lobes held a deeper mathematical truth. Knowledge within the guilds was a fortress with many gates. A laborer knew how to mix mortar. A journeyman could execute complex geometric designs from a template. But only a fully trusted master, an initiate, would be shown the final key, the lexicon that transformed art into argument and decoration into doctrine. This tiered system was their ultimate security protocol. It ensured that if a suspicious abbot interrogated a common carver, the man could truthfully swear he was just making pretty leaves for the glory of God. The deepest secrets were safe, compartmentalized in the minds of a select few. The key itself was not a single object, but a living tradition woven from three strands. The first was oral instruction, the whispered words that gave life to silent stone. A master would take his chosen apprentice to a specific capital, pointing not at the whole carving, but at a minute detail. He might say, "See how the dragon's tail curls 7 times. That is the number of days for the lime mortar to cure before the next course is laid." Or, "This cluster of 5 grapes does not represent the fruits of the earth. It is a reminder that the foundation must be 5 times as wide as the wall is thick to bear the spire's weight." Without that specific verbal clue, the detail remained forever locked, a beautiful mystery with no solution. The second strand was the mastery of sacred geometric constructions, the ability to generate entire layouts from a few compass swings and straight-edge rules. These constructions were the syntactic rules of the language. The third strand was the symbolic dictionary itself, the agreed-upon meanings for hundreds of figures, from animals to plants to fantastical beasts, which could vary slightly from one guild lodge to another. This multi-layered cipher was brilliantly resilient. Even if a rival builder or a church official managed to steal a set of architectural plans, they would only possess the skeleton of the design. They would lack the oral tradition that explained why a window was angled precisely half a degree off true north, or what philosophical concept was hidden in the repetition of a knot pattern along the choir screen. The code was designed for perfect secrecy and perfect clarity, but only within its intended audience. It functioned as a filter, allowing safe, orthodox interpretations to flow upward to patrons and bishops, while the dangerous, esoteric truths traveled horizontally from one initiated master to another across time and space. This sophisticated system of layered knowledge could not remain static, however. As the world shifted around them, the language of the stones was forced to evolve or risk fading into permanent silence. The heavy stone of Romanesque churches speaks a language of earthly weight and divine judgment. Walk into one of these 11th century structures, and you feel the mass of the walls, the small windows, the atmosphere of a fortress braced against a tumultuous world. The carvings from this era reflect that stark reality. On the great tympanum over the main door at the Abbey of Saint Pierre in Moissac, we see the Last Judgment rendered with terrifying clarity. Christ sits in majesty, surrounded by the symbols of the four evangelists, while below him, the saved are separated from the damned in a narrative that is impossible to misunderstand. The message is explicit, the symbolism direct, meant to inspire awe and fear in a population living through plague, famine, and uncertainty. The codes here were bold, apocalyptic, and deeply rooted in the collective anxiety of the age. Then, over the course of a few generations, the very stone seemed to learn how to fly. The Gothic style emerged, and with it, the secret language of the builders transformed. The thick walls dissolved into vast curtains of stained glass, and the weight of the ceiling was lifted by an exoskeleton of delicate flying buttresses. This architectural revolution was, in itself, a profound symbolic statement, a physical manifestation of a new aspiration toward heaven, toward light, toward transcending the heavy burdens of the material world. The carvings had to keep pace. They could no longer be the bold, declarative statements of the Romanesque. They became more refined, more intricate, and far more deeply woven into the structure's very being. Compare that stark Last Judgment at Moissac with the North Rose window of Notre Dame de Paris. Both are masterpieces, but they communicate in entirely different tongues. The Rose window is not a single, clear story. It is a complex mosaic of color and light, a geometric puzzle where prophets and kings orbit a central figure of the Virgin. Its meaning is not immediately obvious. It is layered, implicit, and requires a key to be fully deciphered. The shift from the Romanesque to the Gothic is a shift from a shouted proclamation to a whispered secret. The codes became more abstract, relying less on narrative and more on the silent mathematics of sacred geometry. A gargoyle on a Gothic cathedral is not just a waterspout. It is a philosophical statement about the nature of the universe, hiding the grotesque and the chaotic within a structure that reaches for divine perfection. This evolution proves the incredible resilience and adaptability of this clandestine communication. It was a living language, changing its dialect to suit the architecture of its time, ensuring its survival through centuries of transformation. To truly hear this silent language, we must now step inside two of its most eloquent monuments. Chartres Cathedral rises from the French plains like a frozen prayer, its every stone whispering a secret. Its famous labyrinth, set into the floor of the nave, is far more than a simple path for pilgrims to traverse on their knees. To the initiated, this winding, 11-circuit pattern was a sophisticated spiritual and intellectual map. Each turn and quadrant is believed to correspond with Kabbalistic principles of divine emanation and alchemical stages of inner transformation. Walking its path was not merely an act of penance, but a symbolic journey of ascending through layers of consciousness, a guided meditation carved directly into the heart of the cathedral. This was knowledge made experiential, a truth you had to walk to understand. Step outside to the royal portal, and the stone figures standing in eternal silence begin to speak a coded language. The precise angles of their staffs, the specific way a book is held open or closed, the subtle tilt of a head, these are not random artistic choices. Researchers suggest these postures form a kind of symbolic syntax, a visual sentence spelling out a hidden message about the nature of wisdom itself. It communicates that true knowledge is not simply given, but must be actively sought, decoded, and internalized, a deeply personal gnosis that challenges the idea of wisdom dispensed solely by an institution. Perhaps the most breathtaking code at Chartres is written in light itself. The cathedral's alignment and its legendary stained glass windows form a precise astronomical instrument. On specific days of the year, a beam of sunlight will strike a particular mark on the floor or illuminate a certain colored pane with uncanny accuracy, tracking the solstices and equinoxes. This was their silent declaration of a cosmos governed by mathematical law, a harmonious system they understood and could predict long before such ideas were safe to profess aloud. Chartres is the ultimate expression of the builder's art, a place where public devotion and deeply hidden esoteric knowledge coexist in a breathtaking, layered masterpiece. It proves that the most profound truths were not locked away in secret vaults, but offered freely to anyone with the eyes to see and the mind to understand. Roslin Chapel huddles in a Scottish glen, a small structure absolutely bursting with carved secrets. Its walls are so densely packed with figures, plants, and symbols that it feels less like a chapel and more like a library where every book is open at once. While popular tales speak of Templar treasures and the lost Holy Grail, the true code of Roslin is etched into its very flora. High on the walls, a keen observer can find stone-carved cobs of maize and spiky leaves of aloe plants. This is a historical impossibility, a clear and deliberate anomaly. Maize and aloe were native to the Americas, continents officially unknown to 15th century Europe. Their presence here is not a decorative whim, it is a bold, silent testimony. The builders of Roslin must have had access to transatlantic knowledge, likely passed through seafaring contacts that operated far outside approved channels. To carve such plants was to embed a heretical geographical fact into the chapel's skin, a permanent record of a world much larger and more mysterious than the church or crown would admit. The most famous of all Roslin's enigmas is the apprentice pillar, a twisting, spiraling masterpiece of stone that legends say was carved by a young mason while his master was away. The story goes that upon seeing this perfection, the master flew into a murderous rage. This dark tale is likely a metaphor itself, warning of the dangers of possessing forbidden knowledge too soon. The pillar's intricate design, with its spiraling vines and complex geometry, is far more than a show of skill. Some researchers argue it is a three-dimensional diagram of the alchemical process, specifically encoding the formula for the mysterious philosophical mercury, the volatile spirit that transforms base matter into spiritual gold. To know this formula was to understand the secret principles of creation, knowledge so potent it was considered too dangerous for the uninitiated. Roslin stands as the ultimate proof that this coded language was not merely for preserving philosophical ideas. It was a secure vault for hard, factual discoveries that shattered the contemporary understanding of the world. These case studies of Chartres and Roslin reveal a system of immense breadth, but such a lasting legacy could not be built with intellect alone. It required a set of tools, both physical and intellectual, instruments that could turn abstract geometry into enduring stone. The chisel in a master's hand was more than a tool, it was a pen for writing in stone. Every strike was deliberate, every mark imbued with potential meaning. The physical act of carving demanded a meditative focus, a union of mind, body, and material that turned labor into a form of prayer, but the tools themselves held a power far beyond their function. The compass, which could inscribe perfect circles, was universally understood to represent the spiritual realm, the heavens, and the infinite. Its partner, the square, which could only create right angles and straight lines, symbolized the earth, the material world, and the realm of the measurable. When these two symbols were depicted together, intertwined, they formed one of the most potent emblems of the builder's philosophy, the unification of spirit and matter. This was not a casual metaphor, it was a core belief made visible, a declaration that their work was about bridging the divine and the earthly. A master builder did not merely use these tools, he understood their symbolic weight as deeply as he understood their practical use. This symbolic language extended even to the specific marks the tools left behind. The rough, textured gouges of a toothed chisel used to block out the basic form of a figure might indicate that the carving itself contained only a surface-level, orthodox meaning, safe for any observer. The parallel lines left by a claw chisel during the shaping phase could signal a deeper layer of interpretation, a message intended for those with some initiation. Finally, the smooth, polished surface achieved by the finest points and flat chisels might mark the carvings that held the most dangerous and refined secrets, accessible only to those who had mastered the craft in its entirety. The level of finish was a clear indicator of the level of knowledge contained within. In this worldview, the craftsmanship was completely inseparable from the message. The builder was not just an artisan, he was a scribe, and his workshop was a scriptorium for forbidden texts written in granite and limestone. This profound, holistic connection between the tool and the meaning it created gave the entire system its integrity and power. Yet this intricate, silent language of symbols and stones did not develop in an isolated bubble. It existed in a constant, delicate dance with the very powers that sought to control all forms of expression. The silent rebellion carved into cathedral walls did not go unnoticed by the powers it challenged. From the highest levels of the church, a complex and calculated response unfolded, one that balanced between the hammer of condemnation and the velvet glove of co-option. When a bishop or abbot recognized a symbol's true, unorthodox meaning, the reaction could be swift and brutal. Records from some monastic sites speak of specific carvings being deliberately defaced, their faces scratched away or their forms broken with chisels. This was a clear message of suppression, an attempt to erase the dangerous ideas before they could take root in the minds of the populace. Yet, outright destruction was not always the most strategic path. The Church, a master of symbolism itself, often chose a more subtle and brilliant tactic. It began to absorb the very symbols it feared, systematically reinterpreting them within a safe Christian framework. The Green Man, that ancient face of the wild earth spirit, was given a new, orthodox biography. From the pulpit, priests might explain that the leafy face emerging from stone represented not a pagan deity, but the resurrection of Christ springing forth from the tomb, or perhaps the innocence of Adam in the Garden of Eden before sin entered the world. This act of symbolic theft was incredibly effective. It neutralized the subversive power of the image without the messy and public act of destroying popular art. It created a perfect duality, a single symbol that could speak in two different tongues simultaneously. For the common worshipper, it was a comforting reminder of biblical stories. For the initiated Mason, it remained a defiant statement on the living intelligence of the natural world. This delicate dance between creator and censor forced the coded language to evolve, to bury its meanings even deeper, and to rely more on the unspoken context of geometry and number that was harder for authorities to police. The very pressure applied to suppress these ideas only honed them into a more refined and resilient cipher. Yet this intricate balance could not hold forever. A new intellectual dawn was approaching, one that would bring a different kind of light to the cathedral walls and, in doing so, begin to erase the very need for their silent stone language. Johannes Gutenberg's printing press shattered the old world of whispered secrets. With a slow, relentless turn of its screw, it began to pull the very threads from the tapestry of the masons' coded language. For centuries, knowledge had been a physical thing, etched in stone or painstakingly copied by hand on fragile vellum. Now it could be replicated 1,000 times over, bound between covers and carried across Europe. Dangerous ideas about philosophy, astronomy, and the self no longer needed to be hidden in the curl of a leaf or the angle of an arch. They could be printed, published, and debated openly in the new intellectual climate of the Renaissance. The humanist cry to return to the original sources meant that the wisdom the builders had worked so hard to preserve was suddenly becoming public property. The very reason for their secret stone language was evaporating. You could now hold a book that explained the principles of sacred geometry, a text that would have once cost a master mason his life to possess. The risk had been outsourced from the chisel to the printing house. This fundamental shift did not just make knowledge more accessible, it fundamentally altered the relationship between the artisan and his craft. The guilds, once the sole guardians of advanced technical and philosophical secrets, saw their monopoly on wisdom begin to dissolve. Why spend a decade as an apprentice learning a complex symbolic lexicon when the same principles could be studied from a printed volume in the comfort of a scholar's library? The intricate carvings did not stop, of course. Cathedrals and churches continued to be built and adorned, but the driving urgency behind the symbols changed. A green man carved in the 16th century was often a respectful nod to tradition, a beautiful anachronism rather than a vital vessel for a suppressed earth-based spirituality. The deep, dangerous meanings began to fade from the collective memory of the craft, leaving behind the beautiful shell of the symbolism without its incendiary core. The stone carvings shifted from being a living, necessary language to a revered but increasingly archaic art form. The master builder's most precious secrets, the formulas for mortar and the geometric keys to stable structures, were gradually published in architectural treatises. What was once forbidden knowledge passed from master to apprentice in a hushed lodge was now available for anyone with the means to buy a book. This was the true end of their era. The stone itself was no longer the primary medium for clandestine communication. The archive had moved from the cathedral wall to the printed page, yet the legacy of this silent language was far too profound to simply disappear. It simply retreated, waiting for a future age to look back at the stones with new eyes and begin the work of deciphering their long-forgotten messages. The coded language of the stones did not die with the last cathedral, it simply changed hands. As the great building projects waned, the operative stonemason guilds began to transform. From their lodges emerged a new kind of society, speculative Freemasonry. These new masons were not men who worked with stone, but men who used the stonemasons' ancient symbols as tools to build their own moral and philosophical character. The compass and square, once literal tools of the trade, became metaphors for balancing the spiritual and the earthly within oneself. The rough ashlar, an unfinished block of stone, represented the unrefined human soul, and the perfect cubic stone symbolized that soul after a lifetime of disciplined self-improvement. This was the old language repurposed for a new age, its architectural codes translated into a system of personal enlightenment. This philosophical revival ignited a fresh wave of curiosity about the original source material, the medieval cathedrals themselves. For the first time in centuries, people were looking at the carvings not just as religious art, but as potential puzzles. This intellectual spark was fanned into a flame by the 19th century Gothic revival. Architects like Augustus Pugin saw in the intricate stonework a purity and spiritual depth they felt was lost in the modern industrial world. They began to studiously copy the styles of the great medieval builders, though they often missed the deeper, hidden meanings, creating a beautiful but largely superficial echo of the original code. Simultaneously, esoteric movements like the Theosophical Society, led by figures like Helena Blavatsky, dove headlong into the mystery. They saw the cathedrals not as Christian monuments, but as universal repositories of ancient wisdom, claiming the carvings held secrets from lost civilizations like Atlantis. This brought global attention to the symbols, but it also wrapped them in layers of romantic speculation that often obscured the historical reality of the medieval artisans. The quest to understand had truly begun again, but it was a quest now filtered through the lenses of philosophy, romanticism, and occultism. The modern academic approach had to cut through this accumulated speculation. Today, scholars employ rigorous historical methods, comparing patterns across hundreds of sites and analyzing guild records to reconstruct the builder's actual world. The debate is fierce. Does a specific cluster of grapes represent the fruits of the spirit, or is it a precise mnemonic for a vineyard's harvest calendar used to time construction phases? Was the intent behind a peculiar geometric pattern purely aesthetic, or was it a deliberate mathematical challenge for apprentices? These questions are no longer just philosophical, they are historical and archaeological. And now, this centuries-long decipherment is entering its most revolutionary phase, powered by tools the original builders could never have conceived. A laser scanner's beam traces the contours of a weathered gargoyle, capturing its form with a precision the original carver could never have verified. This is the new frontier of decoding, where digital archaeology is transforming our ability to listen to the stones. Technologies like three-dimensional laser scanning and photogrammetry are creating perfect, immortal digital twins of entire cathedral facades. A researcher in an office in Tokyo can now zoom into the minute chisel marks on a capital in Spain, measuring angles and depths to a fraction of a millimeter. This scale of analysis was unimaginable just a generation ago. It allows for the comparison of a specific symbol, say a particular type of foliage used on a column, across hundreds of sites simultaneously. The subtle variations that might have indicated a regional dialect of the symbolic language are now becoming visible. Even more powerful is the role of artificial intelligence. Researchers are feeding thousands of images of carvings into machine learning algorithms, training them to recognize patterns invisible to the human eye. The AI can scan through a digital library of motifs from England to Bohemia, searching for consistent correlations. It might discover that a specific five-petaled flower, when carved adjacent to a certain geometric shape, almost always appears on the north wall of a chapel. This is no longer about interpreting a single symbol, but about reverse engineering the entire symbolic syntax. The algorithm is not guessing at meaning. It is coldly and statistically identifying a builder's consistent visual vocabulary. This digital toolbox is a powerful filter for truth, helping to separate the plausible historical interpretations from centuries of accumulated fanciful theories and romantic speculation. It brings a new, data-driven rigor to a field once dominated by intuition and anecdote. With these tools, we are no longer just looking at the carvings, we are beginning to read the underlying code. This technological leap allows us to ask a question that was previously too vast to tackle. Did this silent language of stone have a global reach, connecting builders across continents in a web of shared secrets? The master builders of Europe were not alone in their silent conversation with stone. Across the Mediterranean and deep into Asia, other hands were carving a similar language, proving this was a universal human impulse. In the grand mosques of the Islamic world, the soaring arches and dizzying tilework are far more than decoration. The intricate geometric patterns, known as jiri, form an endless, interlocking tapestry that deliberately avoids depicting living forms. To the faithful, this represents the infinite, unrepresentable nature of God. But for the initiated artisan, these same patterns were a sophisticated mathematical code. The precise repetition of stars and polygons, the complex tessellations that cover entire walls, are physical expressions of advanced algebraic and trigonometric principles. They are a meditation on unity and multiplicity, a visual representation of a cosmos emerging from a single, divine source, encoded in a language of lines and angles that could be understood by a scholar from any culture. This was a parallel system of encryption, using mathematical beauty to convey philosophical truths that were too profound for simple words. Half a world away, the architects of Hindu temples were engaged in a remarkably similar project. Their entire approach to sacred space was governed by the Vastu Shastras, ancient texts that dictated every dimension according to cosmic principles. The temple was not merely a building, it was a symbolic universe. Its layout is a precise mandala, a geometric diagram of the cosmos, with the central shrine representing the sacred mountain at the center of the world. Every carving on its towering gopurams tells a story from epic mythology, but these are not simple illustrations. The specific posture of a dancing Shiva, the number of arms on a goddess, the arrangement of deities around a doorway, all encode specific spiritual teachings and cosmological truths. The temple itself becomes a three-dimensional guide to enlightenment, a path one walks physically that is meant to mirror an inner spiritual journey. The parallel to the labyrinth at Chartres is unmistakable, a shared understanding that architecture could be a machine for transformation. Seeing these traditions side by side, a profound pattern emerges. From the Gothic cathedral to the grand mosque to the Hindu temple, we find a recurring human need to make our deepest understanding of the universe permanent and tangible. It is a response to the same fundamental challenge: how to safeguard fragile wisdom from the erosion of time, censorship, and forgetting. Whether the tool was a Christian griffin, an Islamic star pattern, or a Hindu deity, the goal was identical: to build a library that could not be burned, a school that would never close its doors. This global context transforms our view of the medieval European masons. They were not quirky outliers, but participants in a timeless, worldwide fellowship of builders who chose stone as their parchment. They all understood that the most dangerous and beautiful ideas are too precious to be left on a vulnerable page, and that the safest place to hide a secret is in the light, woven into the very fabric of a space meant to inspire awe. This shared legacy forces us to ask a deeper question, not about the symbols themselves, but about the very nature of the knowledge they were designed to protect. What was so fundamentally threatening about these truths that cultures across the world independently developed such elaborate systems to conceal them in plain sight? This deliberate concealment of knowledge was never just about survival. It was rooted in a profound philosophical conviction that truth must be earned to be truly possessed. The master builders understood that a secret handed to you freely is often forgotten, but a secret you wrestle from the stone with your own mind becomes a part of your very being. The journey of deciphering a symbol, of measuring a geometric ratio, of finally understanding why a specific number of petals was carved into a rose, this process was itself the lesson. It was a spiritual exercise in patience, observation, and independent thought. The code acted as a perfect filter. It ensured that the powerful, life-altering truths they protected would not fall into the hands of the casually curious or the cynically powerful. Only someone with the right intent, the perseverance to look closer, and the humility to learn from the work of their own hands would ever gain access. This ancient philosophy stands in stark contrast to our modern world of instant information. We are surrounded by endless data, a constant stream of answers delivered to our screens without any requirement for us to ask a meaningful question. The builders would argue that this ease of access can make knowledge cheap and our understanding of it shallow. Their hidden language forces us to confront a difficult idea. What profound truths are we missing today, not because they are hidden, but because we have forgotten how to look for them? What if the world around us, from the pattern of leaves on a tree to the design of our own cities, is still speaking in a silent tongue we have simply lost the patience to hear? This is not a call to abandon modern life, but an invitation to reclaim a way of seeing. The stone walls are waiting to speak if you know how to listen. You can begin this detective work without any specialized training, starting with the most fundamental principle of any language: repetition. When you stand before a cathedral facade, do not let your eyes glide over the surface. Instead, count how many times does that specific type of flower appear along the archway. Is a particular mythical beast carved at regular intervals around the entire building? A symbol used once might be decorative, but a symbol repeated with clear intention is almost always a signpost, a deliberate emphasis on a particular idea or number that held meaning for the builders. This repetition is the rhythm of their silent speech. Next, train your eye to spot the anomaly, the single carving that seems to break the established pattern. Look for a figure that feels stylistically out of place, perhaps more crude or more refined than its neighbors, or one that depicts a theme completely unrelated to the biblical scenes around it. A pagan green man grinning from a column of saints is not a mistake. It is a shout in a room of whispers. This anomaly is a flag planted in the stone, a deliberate marker meant to draw the eye of someone who knows to look for the exception. Your investigation must then move from the stone itself to the world that shaped it. Before you visit a site, spend an hour researching its historical context. When was it built, and who was the bishop or abbot in charge? What philosophical heresies were being actively suppressed in that region at that exact time? Were there controversies about the nature of the soul or debates about the shape of the cosmos? This background knowledge provides the essential key. A dragon carved in a region known for persecuting alchemists takes on a vastly different and more dangerous meaning than the same dragon in a more tolerant area. It tells you what the builders were risking and therefore what they valued enough to hide. With this context, you can begin to consult the dictionaries of their time. Look into medieval bestiaries which assigned complex moral and philosophical meanings to animals, both real and imagined. Study the geometric diagrams found in the margins of philosophical manuscripts. But a word of caution: be deeply skeptical of modern esoteric books that project 20th century occult ideas onto medieval minds. The true meaning of a symbol is found in the documents and art contemporary to the cathedral's construction, not in later reinterpretations. The final and most important step is to go and practice. Visit a local medieval church or cathedral. Do not walk through as a tourist, passively absorbing the grandeur. Instead, stand in one spot for 10 minutes. Pick a small section of wall and read it like a page in a book. Look for the repetitions, hunt for the anomaly. Ask yourself why this particular carving is placed here at this height, facing this direction. The simple act of believing that there might be more than meets the eye is the most powerful tool you possess. This shift in perspective, from seeing ornamentation to seeing potential communication, unlocks an entirely new way of interacting with history. It turns a visit into a conversation across centuries. Yet as we arm ourselves with these methods, we must also cultivate a scholar's humility, for the full truth of what these artisans meant may be forever beyond our grasp. We must walk a fine line between discovery and delusion when reading these stones. The romantic pull of lost secrets can tempt us to see codes everywhere, transforming every weathered crack and whimsical face into a profound philosophical statement. This is the trap of symbolic inflation, a term used by historians like Professor Ian Campbell to describe our tendency to project modern fantasies onto medieval minds. A carving of a cat chasing its own tail might captivate us with its possible meaning, but it could just as easily be the playful doodle of an apprentice amusing himself during a lunch break. The board carver with a sharp chisel and a spare piece of stone is one of the most overlooked figures in this entire mystery. He was a human being, not a robot, capable of both deep intentionality and simple personal whimsy. Distinguishing between the two requires a rigorous toolkit. A credible interpretation cannot rest on a single, isolated symbol. It demands a web of corroborating evidence. Does a specific geometric pattern appear in multiple, geographically distant cathedrals built under the guidance of the same guild? Does a guild's own record book, its book of charges, make any veiled reference to the meaning of a particular animal? Furthermore, we must always consider the brutal physical reality of the craft. A master designer might have envisioned a perfect, meaning-laden form, but the mason executing it had to work with the grain of the stone, a flawed block, or the simple limitation of his own skill. What we might interpret as a deliberate, cryptic alteration could just be a mason fixing a mistake. The most satisfying answers lie in this balance, acknowledging that these buildings contain both brilliantly encoded messages and the simple, human fingerprints of their creators. Holding this skeptical perspective is not a rejection of the mystery, but the only way to honor its true depth. It forces us to ask not just what we want to find, but what the builders themselves, as practical artists and cautious philosophers, actually left for us to find. This disciplined approach finally brings us to the heart of the matter, the enduring human need that drove this entire clandestine project to begin with. These stone cathedrals are the permanent libraries of a world before paper. Their ultimate achievement was not merely architectural grandeur, but the creation of a vast, distributed knowledge network built to endure. While wars burned libraries and revolutions scattered archives, these structures stood firm. Their encoded messages, carved in granite and limestone, have survived for centuries, silently transmitting their contents through plague, fire, and the rise and fall of empires. They are a monumental testament to the human spirit's relentless drive to preserve truth and beauty against any force that would seek to erase them. The very existence of these carvings proves a profound point, that knowledge, when woven into the fabric of something beloved and vital, becomes almost impossible to destroy. We may never fully decipher the meaning of every peculiar beast or every precise geometric ratio, yet the fact that they are still there, waiting for a curious mind to notice them, is a victory in itself. It reminds us that ideas are resilient, and that suppression often only forces innovation in the methods of preservation. In a very real sense, these cathedrals functioned as the hard drives of the pre-modern world. They stored vast amounts of data, from engineering formulas to philosophical arguments, in a format that has proven remarkably resilient to corruption and decay. This ancient legacy now poses a direct and challenging question to our own digital age. We store our collective knowledge on servers and in cloud storage, formats that are incredibly fragile, susceptible to electromagnetic pulses, cyber attacks, or simple technological obsolescence. How will our most vital truth survive 500 years from now, let alone 1,000? The medieval builders chose their medium with breathtaking foresight, betting on the enduring strength of stone. Their silent messages, carved for eternity, ask us to consider what we are building today that will whisper our stories to the future. This coded language of stone is a profound chapter in the history of human thought, a testament to both the fragility and the incredible resilience of knowledge itself. Our journey has taken us from the oppressive pressures that made secrecy a matter of survival to the brilliant methods of encoding heretical theologies and advanced sciences into seemingly innocent carvings. We have followed the master builders on their covert travels and have now equipped ourselves with digital tools to continue their decipherment. The ultimate lesson etched into these stones is that truth has a stubborn habit of enduring, often hiding in the most visible and unexpected of places. These silent walls extend a timeless invitation to us all, urging us to look past the surface, to question the stories we are told, and to marvel at the boundless creativity of the human spirit. So the next time you find yourself before an ancient stone wall, pause for a moment. Remember that you might not be looking at mere decoration, but at a forbidden library, its pages written in a language of symbol, number, and form. Let this exploration inspire you to seek out the hidden narratives woven into the world around you. And if you discover a secret of your own, we would be fascinated to hear your story in the comments below.